Welcome to My Therapist is Out. Each episode, we talk with a therapist from Open Space Therapy Collective or LGBT community members about mental health and building community. I'm your host, Renae Johnson, licensed therapist and founder of Open Space Therapy Collective, where we are your hub for queer and trans mental health care. As we dive into today's topic, please keep in mind that this is a mental health podcast. We will talk about sensitive and difficult issues that are not appropriate for all audiences. Please take care while listening. Welcome back to My Therapist is Out. I am so excited and so honored today. We have a very special guest and the person who has inspired our series on identity-based harm and community care. So please join me in welcoming Jose Rosario from Phoenix Empowered. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. High praise to say that I inspired this. How cool is that?
Yeah, we said this a little bit before, but when you reached out and I introduced you to our team, everybody got really excited because the work that you are doing is so aligned what we do with the podcast and Open Space Therapy Collective that it just felt like such a natural fit to have you on and really deep dive. And I'm very excited. So I'm going to try not to be like too jittery as we go through our topics today. But in all of that gushing, can you introduce yourself and your specialty and what you're doing with Phoenix Empowered?
Yeah. Who am I? The through line, I guess, in who am I? Most recently, it's become very clear that it's storytelling. And so I am a doctoral candidate. I will be finishing up my PhD in just a couple of months, which is wild. I'm so ready.
That's amazing.
A long road. So I'm a researcher. I'm a therapist, going to be a psychologist. I'm an activist. I am a storyteller. I am a person that believes that stories have power. I believe that who we are not only makes us different, but it makes us powerful. And for a long time, difference was so scary to me as a queer Latino man who uses a wheelchair and feeling so alone in that experience. You know, when I told my story for the first time, it really shifted that for me and I found I'm not alone. And so now my whole life is dedicated to amplifying these stories and understanding where we need to be better as mental health professionals and then figuring out how we're going to actually do that if we say we're going to.
Yeah. I watched your TED Talk, which if y'all haven't watched it and listened to it yet, highly recommend. It is powerful and beautiful, and I definitely was teary-eyed throughout the whole thing. And you've had some talks following that. And I think one of the parts that was really moving to me is you do such a beautiful job of combining the self with being in community and being a mental health professional. And I feel like a lot of people really struggle in being all of those things at one time. We'll like jump into like, oh, I am these personal identities over here and I'm professional identities over here. And there's some of this activist stuff in the middle, but you do a really great job of being your whole self as you go into these public spaces. How did you get to the point where you had enough confidence and courage to be able to do that?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by just saying it didn't come naturally because I think we're trained to not do that, right? I remember training as an addiction scientist, addiction therapist, and being told, the context stuff doesn't matter. What matters is focusing on the treatment, the randomized control trial. And I would bring up things like, well, maybe this isn't working because of poverty, or maybe it isn't working because there's no access to transportation to get to treatment. And it wasn't really received. And so the message I got was, that doesn't matter. And in our own lives, I think we're taught to make ourselves small. So when you couple the training telling you it doesn't matter and life telling you, don't talk about these things, don't talk about mental health, it creates this narrative of like, oh no, we can't go there, we can't bring the full human in. And this is going to sound silly, but it happened by accident for me. When I was asked to do a talk for the first time, I was kind of bamboozled. So I thought, I genuinely thought that they wanted Jose in the suit with the charts and the data because that's who I was. And that's why I said yes. And then when they said, oh no, we don't want whatever that is that you're doing, like, we want you to tell your story, it was really like, well, damn, I'm stuck now. I have to do this. And so it truly was by accident. But what I can tell you is that telling my story for the first time was the scariest and the most liberating thing I have ever done. I can't tell you anything I said on that stage, but I can tell you the visceral, full body reaction of like just opening up and being like, this is who I am, and having to like sit with that and be like, you're a full human with all of these pieces that you've never talked about. It was wild, but the reception to that really changed me. Yeah. So I'm not sure if that answered your question, but it was sort of a full journey.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And I love that you're outlining that because so many people come into this thinking they have to have it perfect and they have to have the way that they're presenting to the world be perfect and polished. And the fact that you accidentally committed to something and that's the thing that was like, no, it's time for you to do this. And you were able to open up and have such a warm reception is really important. And I think something that people need to hear, especially as we are dealing with the current political climate, is that there are spaces and people want to know the you, and it's the us that steps forward. And that's where that power comes from. Like you're talking with storytelling, and is when we make ourselves small, then our efforts are just as small.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The liberation piece is so important, but I've struggled a lot with this idea of representation, and like, representation's not enough. It's not enough for us to be the diversity person, to be the queer person that people can call and be like, tell us how to be allies. Like, that's not how this works. And so I think there's a fine line. But I remember prepping for that first talk the day before because I procrastinated because I didn't want to do it, and just like crying because it was the first time I saw that baby who went through so many different pieces of the system telling him, it's not enough, you're not enough, you can't do this. To see it all there in one place was just like, whoa.
It's such a beautiful thing when we can see ourselves not just as the adult, but as the younger selves that went through all of this to get to the point where you can start talking about it, where you can honor,
Yeah.
like, hey, I have been through so much and I have enough strength and power and community to stand up and tell this story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To pivot a little bit, because you're hitting on this already,
Yeah.
and you've mentioned it with addiction sciences, you mentioned it with your own story a little bit, is how the system really stopped you from acknowledging different parts of yourself, or how
Mm-hmm.
transportation to get to treatment isn't, no, we need to not include that. And since we're talking about identity-based harm, and we'll get into that definition a little bit,
Yeah.
how do you define identity-based harm, and how do, I don't know if these are even small enough to be called microaggressions, but how do these systematic or systemic issues start playing into the limitations and the making you small in these identity-based issues
Mm-hmm.
as somebody's trying to discover themselves and really understand their experience?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many pieces to that, right? I'll start by just kind of defining how I see identity-based harm, because I think that'll give us places to go and play and think about. I really think about hate-based violence. I use the Ghaffori 2019 definition of hate-based violence, where there are different levels of hate-based violence. It's not just physical violence. It includes hate speech. It includes discrimination. It includes prejudice. All of that is violence. All of that is violence towards the self and towards the psyche when it is directed at a part of you and who you are. So I think about violence with our clients, for example. as being so multi-layered and interconnecting systems. They're navigating legal systems, education systems, healthcare systems. We are a part of these systems, right? We are a part of the education and healthcare system as mental health professionals, for example. And so it can be really complicated and intersectional in that way. And then I also think about cultural trauma, which is where this all started for me. This idea that you don't have to be present at a hate-based event, at a hate-based violent event, to have a reaction. You can have a reaction just because they are people that share your identity. And it happened to me, right? When the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, where Latine queer folks were targeted, that was a moment where I had to be like, oh, my people are being harmed. My people are being targeted. And that did have an impact on me and those I was serving at that institution. And so um, for me, I think I see harm as being chronic, as being overt and covert, and as being something that I think people downplay a lot. And there's this sort of like, oh, you're seeing harm everywhere. The reality is, when people are invalidated over and over and over again, that is harmful. Yeah.
That just that just hits hard. Is I was listening to a podcast. I can't remember what it was, but they were talking about how social media algorithms. There's a hate based algorithm and a hope based algorithm,
Um,
and how depending on what you respond to is what you get.
mm,
And so I'll find myself going through and paying attention to what's going on in the news or responding to activists who are doing very cool things. And all of a sudden I'll find that my whole feed is about violence and identity-based violence and all of these things. And there's a space of that I've been thinking a lot about lately is, okay, how much am I exposing myself to this um, intentionally or unintentionally? And how much of this is just everywhere?
mm,
And I appreciate what you're saying, because even in the covert, even in the unintentional, it's there, and how we respond to it is going to be the really important thing.
absolutely. We can't control, unfortunately, right, how much we're exposed to violence, exposed to harm, but we control our responses, our reactions, not our reactions, but the ways in which we can then decide what to do, our choices we make after. And yeah, for me, it goes back to leaning into community, right? Because part of violence, part of fear is to silence and isolate you. And so being able to say, I deserve to exist, I mean, that is part of the framework in which I practice. That's the radical healing framework in action.
Backing up a little bit, whether it's about yourself as a queer Latino person using a wheelchair or work that you're doing in your research and with clients, what are you seeing and how are you working with people to both honor and build up strength in identity and acknowledge the violence and the harm that can be associated with that or come with that?
I'll start by just noticing that I'm having a reaction because of something you said earlier. I think part of it is the sort of use of self and playfulness. I think for a while, as a therapist, I thought there was a way to be, and that there had to be some sort of boundary. And of course, there have to be healthy boundaries. But I have found that in being more comfortable to appropriately use myself and my experiences, or be playful and laugh and joke, like there are some of my clients who overtly have asked me, who did you vote for? And choosing whether or not to have that conversation and is it helpful? And for the most part, it has been fruitful, even if we've been on different sides. And so I think part of it is authenticity and vulnerability and being able to say, yeah, the world is scary right now. Like, let's sit in it together. I don't know the answers. But I also think I find my own hope as a person in the fact that there are other really amazing people doing really cool things around the country, around the world. I think it's been really important to me, especially since 2020, to be surrounded by people because there was a time in that early phase where I wondered if I could keep doing this, where it was just heavy, right? It was busy, and I was being booked for every DEI event you could imagine, and people just wanted me to talk about my identities, and I started to feel just so hopeless and empty and almost like, what are we doing? How are we making change? And it wasn't until finding spaces like yours that I was like, oh, there's a bunch of us doing this work. And so I think part of that healing for me has been the collective.
Yeah, same. I That's a big part of what um, spurred Open Space and the podcast is they're doing this work alone, trying to change the dynamic, trying to create safety, trying to create spaces where there aren't violence. Can't be done in isolation. We can't do it.
Mm.
And whether that's as professionals trying to support other people or build those spaces, or just a queer non-binary person in the world, there needs to be community to do that together.
You're making me think of something that I'll just share. You know, what you're describing is radical healing in action, and I keep talking about radical healing because there was also a time during that time period where I wondered, oh, I don't think I can be a therapist. Like
Mm-hmm.
there is too much of me that is thinking about oppression. That's like we got to change things. Like maybe I'm too, radical, so to speak, quote unquote. And I found the psychology of radical healing framework, which comes from people of color who are also queer, non-binary, who hold a bunch of different identities. Right? It's a collective of healers who figured out that people have been healing for a long time. And so, how do minoritized people heal? We heal by understanding systems of oppression and developing critical consciousness. We heal by finding the collective, tapping into that ancestral wisdom of like, we have been in pain before and we will be again, but we have been able to rise from that. We come from activists. We talk about cultural authenticity and leaning into cultural practice and hope, right? Having hope. And these 5 pillars for me have just been so crucial to who I am as a person, who I am as a therapist, and like connecting with my people and thinking about where I come from across all of these different identities. Like, I'm part of the badasses that crawled up the steps of the Capitol building for disability rights. Like, that's cool that I come from that. I come from the queer activists that were like, so what if you're going to come at us? Here we come, hear us roar. Like, that's where I draw that strength to be like, we can do this work.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so it's so important to hear those stories that have come before us and
Mm-hmm.
really stay connected. And it's something that's really helpful for me continuing to hear from friends and colleagues is these reminders, is the reason queer culture has a nightlife is because we spent all day being activists and fighting, and we needed to play and we needed to be together. It's not because what certain people in the world would say that we're horrible, hedonistic, terrible people. It's not that at all. It's actually have since the beginning incorporated play into the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an important touchstone to come back to, and really into our ancestral knowledge isn't necessarily a bloodline. It is that cultural community that has been built over time and time and time.
Totally. Absolutely.
Let's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the effects of hate-based trauma, whether direct or like seeing the Pulse shooting? What does that look like? What are the after effects that somebody might be experiencing? Because we'll get a lot of clients in who are like, well, my family's supportive. I have some good friends. Like, I don't experience trauma. I don't really have this in my life. But then they show up with a whole bunch of other stuff that they don't know where it comes from. So if you can kind of define and set that scene for us, that might be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. There's decades and decades of research to support this, right? Over 25 years of research that tells us that what we know is our definition of trauma as a field was so narrow at the beginning. This idea that something directly happens to you, there is a direct threat against your life, or imagine direct threat against your life, and there is this big reaction and you develop PTSD. What we know is that's only part of the story, right? People can experience traumatic events, for example, and not develop PTSD. So there is real variability. What we know about identity based trauma is that it too can be traumatic when you are a direct recipient. But what scares me even more, and is why I study what I study, is that there is an indirect pathway as well. We know that for teens and adults, chronic exposure to social media posts about violence against your community can lead to increased endorsement of PTSD symptoms. What we know is that if somebody experiences this exposure time and time and time again, we actually see that hyperactivity in the amygdala, that fight or flight response, we see that peak. And so there is a traumatic impact to chronic exposure, even when you haven't experienced it yourself. And unfortunately, that word trauma has been so narrowly defined at the beginning that we do see plenty of folks come in and be like, I don't have trauma. And so I separate it from, well, when we're talking about trauma, we're not necessarily talking about PTSD. We're talking about fear for safety, worry about the future. Like that, those are trauma symptoms if you look at the criteria. And so I think demystifying some of that is important because we know all of it can be traumatic. Whether big T or little t, we can argue that till the cows come home. It's trauma, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I hadn't thought about this in a while, but even worry about the future. Like right now, holy shit.
Yeah.
We're recording in November. This will come out in January. And who knows what will happen in those 2 months. But there is so much of the conversation that is, are we going to be okay? Like, are we going to be able to survive? Are we going to be able to get health care? Because a big chunk of that has gone away already. And where in these definitions, or as you're defining it in your research, where is it trauma from an experience, and where is it a response to something that's actually happening? And are those two things different? Or how do you start to separate those when
Yeah.
somebody's coming in saying, well, I don't have trauma, I'm just worried about what's happening right now?
I think the separation is what is the impact of that worry, right? The anxiety, I think we're all experiencing. And I'm just going to be bold here and say it's a tactic, right? To keep your nervous system flooded is a tactic so that we freeze, so that we are stuck in there. And so the anxiety piece, I think, is one component of it. I think it shifts to trauma when it really starts to impact people's lives, right? When people are pulling away from spaces, when people are telling us things like, I don't want to travel because I'm worried I'm going to get pulled because my gender marker on my passport doesn't match the perceived gender that people look at when people look at me, expect to be on my passport. Or I'm worried because people assume that if I speak Spanish, I'm not a citizen, right? And so these pieces change things. And I think when we're starting to see people avoiding and having nightmares and really endorsing trauma symptoms, that's when we shift over from this is not just anxiety, this is trauma. And I think to your point, and I think the reason why this question is coming up, that line is becoming really muddy, at least clinically, right? And when I talk to my clients, I'm hearing things that sound like trauma, even if they may not meet the level of PTSD, right? It's still like they're endorsing those symptoms because what's happening around them is traumatic. People's lives are being threatened every day. I'll be honest, I've had to pull away from the news cycle for my own well being and really just kind of immerse myself in queer art. That's been my sort of reprieve from that.
Yeah. Same. I deleted the apps and give myself 5 minutes to every couple days to check like a few news sources that I trust and what the other side is saying, and then I'm out.
Yeah.
Because it was getting into that, oh, this is more than anxiety, this is hypervigilance and
Mm-hmm.
almost searching for the harm,
Yeah.
which was not good for me, and I'm sure other people are in that same spot, and it's
Yeah.
it's difficult to figure out how to stay informed and active and take care of yourself and where those lines are. Hey, Renae popping in just for a minute to say thank you for listening. We really hope you are enjoying the conversation today. Any chance you have to rate, review, subscribe, and share with a friend makes a huge impact, and we greatly appreciate it. If you have extra bandwidth and want to support the show even further, you can go to mytherapistisout.com and click the donate button. Any donations from $5 a month to a one-time donation makes a huge difference for us. We're a little self-published podcast, so any extra dollar helps. Again, go to mytherapistisout.com and hit donate. Now back to the show.
And I think I've been really hyper-focused, and at least in my clinical work, about control, because I don't want to tell people that this isn't a real threat, right? Like, the reality is it's a real threat for so many people. And what is in your control? What's in your control is to surround yourself with people who love and affirm you, and having those support systems in place so that if something happens, you have people to lean on. It's about going to therapy and gaining the skills to cope so that in the moment when you're dysregulated, we can work towards, like, let's cope through the moment so that we can move to healing, because coping and healing are two different things. And I think I've been spending a lot of time with clients focused in these areas.
So moving back into radical healing, how are you using these 5 pillars with clients or for yourself? And you've touched on this a little bit, to pull outside of even deep anxiety of what's happening right now and pull away from the trauma responses into these radical healing pillars.
Yeah. This is going to be such a classic therapist response. But the truth is Socratic questioning, right? Allowing the client to explore their experience in oppression, in community. Is it oppression? It sounds like it could be racism. What do you think about that? Like, let's talk about how many times in your life have you been told you can't do something or that you shouldn't exist? Like, what has that been like for you? Really kind of approaching with curiosity to understand their conceptualization of the systemic oppression that's being experienced. And I'm lucky, right? I work with a ton of folks who have different minoritized identities. And so I get to work with folks who want to talk about these things. I also have some folks who very much don't believe they're oppressed and don't want to talk about that, right? And so we take a different approach. But I think giving folks the opportunity to explore that if they want to, allowing folks to put language on their experience on their own, because I think that in and of itself is empowerment. And then talking about, now that we know that these things are bothering you, that these things are causing you pain, how do we connect you to people to feel supported? And so I spend a lot of time focused on the collective and thinking about what are the cultural practices of your identities that are really important to you. For example, if it's like family dinners are really important to you, but you don't have a great relationship with your family, how do we infuse family dinners with chosen family? Can you do weekly dinners with friends? And really thinking about what does it look like to authentically live in these identities for yourself. And some of that also means, how do we engage in resistance strategies, right? If you're feeling like powerless and you want to do something, who are the local nonprofits that you can volunteer with? And really being intentional and mindful. And okay, can you look up 3 nonprofits of interest to you in your local area? Tell me why you're interested in them and what would it look like to be involved? What's your bandwidth to be involved? And really empowering folks to engage in resistance however they want to. The hard part, I think, for me and for clients that I've worked with has been recognizing that sometimes just existing is resistance. Like, you got up this morning, that is resistance. Like, you're doing the thing. And I've had some folks that I've just flat out said, like, these are the 5 pillars of radical healing, and this is what this means. How does that relate back to you? Because people have been healing for generations before therapists were a thing. And we'll have some really cool dialogues about, like, drumming or, like, indigenous practices of healing, and how do we bring that into the therapy room? So it's really individualized, but also really iterative and focused on what is the life you want to create, a full life.
what do you tell people when they're having a hard time making that first step into community? Because something that we see in LA a lot is people are new here or they've been here for a minute, but they're pretty intimidated by LA. And LA has a terrible reputation of being self-absorbed and statusy and whatever. And that part of LA does exist. But there's also the majority of LA is not that at all. It's like a bunch of people who are typically pretty relaxed, down to hang out, want to spend time together, will get really involved around things that they care about everywhere from, we had the fires this past winter and there's a ton of fire relief that came to like drag race when it shows up, to sports, or like the Dodgers fans here. That is a cult in itself, which people love. And it's very cute to see. But there's a lot of opportunity for togetherness. And there's a big part of LA that's founded on that. But people come in and are like, I don't know, like I found a nonprofit that I want to participate in, but I don't know if I can make that step. There's this event, like there's this trans wrestling event, like I want to go, but like, I've never done this before and they're going to judge me. There's a lot of nervousness, self-doubt that comes in that often is around the person's selfhood or their identity is, I'm not gay enough, I'm not trans enough, I'm not LA enough, I'm not, whatever the enough is. And I'm curious if you're seeing that where you're at and how you talk to people about that.
Totally, totally. I absolutely see that. And I see it as bidirectional. So, from a research perspective, one of the things that has been true across all of the studies has been this narrative of, backing up a little bit, I study specifically intersectional experiences. So, at this stage in my career, it's been really focused on queer BIPOC folks. And what I hear time and time again is that queer spaces are not intersectional enough. BIPOC spaces are not intersectional enough. So I think a call to action to folks who are trying to create these spaces are to really think about, are we welcoming all queer folks, all people of color? And what does it look like to do that? Because that's going to require making some pretty intentional and frankly difficult choices and really taking a stance. And I'm not sure that every space is willing to do that. At least that's not what I'm hearing. So I think there's that piece of creating the safety so people will come. Because a lot of what I hear is like, I don't fit in the queer spaces, or, because I'm not a citizen, I'm worried about going to BIPOC spaces. And these are real concerns. And so how do we open up these doors? From the opposite side of somebody saying, am I enough? Should I go? Can I go? Can I exist in these spaces? I think it's about, again, so therapist-y. Whose voice are you hearing that in? Where along the way did you learn that you had to fit some kind of mold in order to be accepted? Because no baby comes into the world being like, I'm not enough of a baby. that's not how this works. So, really unpacking, what does it mean to not be enough? And I'll be honest, that's guided by like my own experience as an activist. I grew up being told I wasn't enough all the time in different ways. And so I think being able to sit with that, understand where it comes from, and can we challenge that? Can we understand that that's not you talking, that is the system talking? And I think that takes a lot of unlearning, a lot of work. And it really comes back to you as a full human, a full person, are deserving to occupy space in the world. Full stop. I don't care if it makes other people uncomfortable. I don't care if they think you're not queer enough because you don't know the newest drag queens in this season, season 35 of RuPaul's Drag Race. Like, that isn't the metric. The metric is, who are you and how will people get to know you? That's pretty special. So I think all of that to say it's complicated and a bidirectional process.
Yeah, I like that, really highlighting that bidirectional process. And even, it's not just like you deserve to take up space, but people want you there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the event that's happening, the nonprofit that's happening, that group of friends want you to show up and they want to know you. They want to offer you the space to be engaged. And so it's not a burdening that you're doing by being there. You're not taking up somebody else's space by being there.
Yeah. Speaking for our nonprofit, I will say we want you so bad. Like, please, we want people to engage. Like, we want the whole reason that, the Phoenix Empowered exists is to amplify stories. We can't do that if people don't share their stories. Now, that being said, we also believe that if people share their stories, we have a duty to respond to that and not just say, oh, wow, that's so sad. Thank you. They're there. It's like, okay, so what are we going to do to change the system that people are operating in?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what Phoenix Empowered is and what y'all are doing?
Yeah. Yes, I absolutely can. I guess to give people a little bit more humanness into who I am, because I bet it sounds like I've got it all together.
What, Jose? You're not perfect?
Oh God, not even a little bit. I was born premature and spent a lot of my life being told in different ways that I wasn't worthy. I've had doctors say to me at 6 years old, he's not going to accomplish anything. You might as well give up on him. Right. And so hearing these messages over and over, hearing the messages like, oh, nobody wants to date the guy in the wheelchair. It's too much work. Like those kinds of messages took a cumulative toll on my own mental health. And what it taught me in sharing my story was that people would say things like, I wish my neighbor could hear this. I wish my sibling could hear this. I wish my brother could hear this. And it really highlighted that there are so many of us that are silenced in the mental health world, that we're not talking about how identity and mental health are linked and they can't be unlinked. I mean, it is all connected. So the Phoenix Empowered was born from that experience that I had. It was born to amplify the mental health stories of minoritized communities through blog posting, through speaking, through our podcast. And so we have all of these different ways that we're trying to uplift stories through social media. And then we also have our mission to educate and change the public. And so we have a full-fledged training program and consultation program about hate-based violence, about identity-based harm, and how do mental health professionals support folks in these arenas, but also how do we create more equitable and safe and empowered spaces through HR consultation, policy, and strategic planning. And so our work is really understanding that mental health is not a one-size-fits-all. In fact, it has to be a global process where intersectionality is at the core and is at the center of it.
If that's not a mic drop, I don't know what is.
Sorry, I get real passionate.
No, I love it. No apologies. It's so important and really does a beautiful job of encompassing what we've been talking about today, is not just having a space to share the story, but having a space to respond to it and having the space to help other people be able to join and understand and be a part of that. Like this, I really appreciate this because there are, and I don't mean this sideways, but there are a lot of nonprofits out there, a lot of events out there, things that are happening that are kind of one note, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's great that we're going to go do storytelling. Love that. But then what? And so the fact that you, through Phoenix Empowered, have the then what, and it's a self-supported, like the cycle really helps not just support what's happening and who's there, but allows and offers and brings in other people. So it just continues to expand the potential for more safety, more community, more building, more together, more healing.
Totally. Yeah. And if I could real talk, like I have had to hold the tension of like never wanting this to be the Jose show and understanding that like my story has informed this process and owning my story. Because the reality is, I don't think I am all that interesting because I don't see myself as being this anomaly. I see myself as being one of so many people whose stories need to be told. And so when I say we want you to engage, the reason why is because I can't speak to every experience. And so I have dreams and I have ongoing plans that we are actively working on to be like, how do we tell all of these stories in really massive and impactful ways? Whether it be through the relaunching of our podcast, whether it be through initiatives that we're still toying with and shifting, but there is a need to have a really inclusive mental health conversation, and we're ready to do that, but it has to be intersectional and intentional and active. So yeah, I'm excited about what's to come for sure.
That's awesome. If someone wants to get involved, how would they find you?
Yeah, we're at the Phoenix Empowered on all platforms, and right now we are seeking volunteers to do things like blog writing, video editing, or content creation. We're also looking at volunteers for fundraising because we have a lot of cool fundraising efforts that we're doing right now, and folks can really just get involved. I would love to just have folks be able to reach out to me and be like, I have this interest or this talent, and I think it fits into this mission this way. Like, let's do something. That's music to my ears because TPE has become my way of playing and my way of bringing the scholar, the therapist, and the human all in one place. I'm so lucky I get to do this work. Truly.
That's amazing. I love that. And we'll put the links to all of this in the show notes, as well as the talks that you've done. And thank you so much for joining me today. This conversation's going to sit with me all week. And I know there's going to be parts of it that are going to keep popping up, but it's really in such a difficult time. It's giving me a lot of hope and grounding. And so thank you so much for sharing about what you're doing and all of the ancestral and radical healing that you're bringing into a space that is so needed.
Thank you. Thank you for opening up this space. And I shared with you offline, and I'll share it here. Spaces like yours are places where I find hope. And so it really is bi-directional and collective that we're rising with each other, right? The name of the organization is Phoenix Empowered because we all want to rise, but we have to be empowered to do so. And that's what we're doing for each other. And frankly, you all are stuck with me because I think you're doing really cool stuff and I can't wait to do more. So it's exciting.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I can't wait. Collaboration is my favorite thing. So we will definitely make that happen. Before we end, do you have a queer moment of joy in the last few weeks that stands out to you?
Yes, I do. So a little bit of just humanness. I really love musicals. And so I want to be cool and be like, I'm too cool for the movie musical. But I have been rewatching Wicked lately so much, and I just watched the live special that they taped, and wow, what a moment of just like celebration of identity. And I think Broadway in its most beautiful form is so queer. And so to me, seeing all folks just being able to like wear makeup, wear dresses, wear whatever feels authentic to you, and just like celebrate two strong female, presumably straight, but I question that, characters coming together. I think there is just something really beautiful about that. And Jonathan Bailey, man. Sorry, but wow.
I love that. Yeah. It's, storytelling in the fantastical space is also a big part of what makes our world so beautiful. And Wicked is, even if they're straight, it's queer coded as hell. Like, it's so great.
We are shipping Alphabet and Glinda, and if you're not, I have questions.
100%. Well, Jose, thank you so much. Again, we'll put all the links in the bio, and I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Hello, my name is Harley. My pronouns are he, they. My moment of queer joy happened today when my friend called me on the phone and told me that he is going into his top surgery next month. Exciting!
Shauna Race, she, her, and my moment honestly is very recently that comes to mind. And it's when Renae and Steven came to me and asked if we can do an event here for Queerly Connected at the bar I opened, which is brand new. And so just the fact that they thought of us, our little bar, and what we're doing to include us in this amazing event is seriously an amazing, amazing moment in my existence of this universe.
Thanks for joining us. If you're in California and looking for a therapist, visit our website at openspacetherapycollective.com and book a free intro call with one of our therapists. If you're enjoying My Therapist Is Out, please rate, review, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Do you know somebody who could use a little extra dose of queer community? Send them one of your favorite episodes of My Therapist Is Out and help our collective grow one listen at a time. My Therapist Is Out is an open space therapy collective podcast, and our podcast editing is done by Rachel Peltzer and Smash and Grab Studio. We'd love to hear from you about today's topic, so email us at info@openspacetherapycollective.com. You can find us on TikTok and Instagram at Open Space Therapy Collective. Thanks for listening.